Team, move out now. Faster, keep formation. This passage here is so inspiring, and the architecture of this building is magnificent.
I can't believe this is happening again. What happened? The same old story. I'm just tired of it.
Try adding more detail there.
Like this?
Yes, that's perfect.
Got it.
They're almost here.
How many?
2 cars, we need to be ready.
We will be. What was that?
The town of Raventon had always been quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business before sunrise and nothing surprising ever lasted past sunset. So when a tall iron gate appeared overnight at the end of Maple Street, people noticed. The gate stood in front of an old, abandoned building that had been empty for years. Within days, a polished wooden sign was hung beside it. The words were simple, yet strange enough to stir whispers across the town. The Institute for Modern Gentleman Training. Admission, men only. No one knew who owned it, where the money came from, or why it had suddenly opened without warning. The mystery grew deeper when the owner finally stepped into public view. Her name was Elena Ward, a woman no one in Raventon had ever seen before. She looked calm, confident, and carried herself with a quiet authority that made people stop talking when she walked by. She wasn't loud or dramatic, yet she drew attention everywhere she went. Elena rented the old town hall for a brief meeting and announced that she had opened an adult learning school designed specifically for men. She claimed the institute would help men succeed in modern life through special training programs that she had personally designed after years of research and experience traveling the world. At first, most people assumed it was just another professional coaching center. Some thought she would teach business skills, confidence building, or career development. But Elena refused to explain her full curriculum. She only shared one rule. Every student had to attend classes in person, follow strict confidentiality agreements, and commit to completing the entire course without revealing what happened inside the building. That secrecy alone was enough to set the town buzzing with curiosity and suspicion. Within the first week, dozens of men signed up. Some were young professionals looking for guidance. Others were middle-aged men struggling with their personal lives or careers. A few were respected community figures whose enrollment shocked their families. The registration fee was unusually high, yet the waiting list continued to grow longer every day. Even more surprising was how quickly the students seemed to change. Men who once avoided conversations began speaking with calm confidence. Others who were known for their temper suddenly became patient and thoughtful. Families started noticing differences, but whenever they asked questions, the students would smile politely and say they had signed agreements that prevented them from discussing their lessons. Rumors spread fast. Some believed Elena was running an elite leadership academy. Others suspected it was some kind of psychological experiment. A few even claimed the institute was changing the town's social balance in ways people didn't fully understand yet. The building itself remained tightly secured, with tinted windows and limited visiting hours. Delivery trucks arrived regularly, carrying books, equipment, and items no one could clearly identify. One evening, a local journalist named Marcus decided to investigate after noticing his own brother had secretly enrolled in the program. Marcus watched from across the street as students entered the building for their night session. Just before the heavy doors closed, he caught a glimpse inside. What he saw wasn't anything he expected from a normal classroom. The students weren't sitting at desks or listening to lectures. Instead, they stood in complete silence while Elena walked slowly between them, holding a small notebook and asking questions that made several men visibly uncomfortable. Marcus leaned closer, trying to hear her words through the narrow opening, when suddenly Elena stopped walking and turned directly toward the doorway, as if she knew someone was watching. The doors slammed shut instantly, leaving Marcus standing alone in the dark, wondering what kind of lessons could make grown men look both terrified and determined at the same time. Marcus stepped back from the gate, his heart beating faster than he expected. He had covered town stories for years, lost pets, council arguments, small business openings, but something about this place felt different. He couldn't explain it, yet the image of those men standing silently while Elena walked among them stayed in his mind long after he returned home. He tried convincing himself it was just an unusual teaching style, maybe confidence training or group therapy. Still, the expressions on their faces didn't look like students eager to learn. They looked like men confronting something they had spent years avoiding. The next morning, Marcus visited his brother Daniel under the excuse of a casual family breakfast. Daniel had always been easygoing and talkative, the kind of person who joked through serious conversations. But recently Marcus noticed changes. Daniel spoke slower, choosing his words carefully, and seemed unusually calm. Even his posture had changed. He sat straighter, made steady eye contact, and listened more than he spoke. At first glance, these seemed like positive changes, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper had shifted. During breakfast, Marcus casually asked about Daniel's new routine. Daniel smiled, stirring his coffee slowly before answering. He admitted he had joined Elena's institute, calling it a life restructuring program. When Marcus pressed for details, Daniel gently refused, reminding him about the confidentiality agreement. He said the training wasn't about business or physical skills but focused on something he described as understanding responsibility in ways most men never learn. His words sounded rehearsed, almost like he had practiced saying them. Marcus noticed something else. Daniel's phone buzzed during their conversation, and Daniel immediately silenced it without checking the screen. That was unusual. Daniel had always been glued to his phone. When Marcus jokingly asked if the institute also taught digital detox classes, Daniel only smiled and changed the subject. The conversation ended with Daniel encouraging Marcus to stop worrying and trust that he was improving his life. Meanwhile, the town's curiosity kept growing. Local shops started noticing groups of men who attended the institute gathering together after classes, but their conversations were always quiet and serious. They didn't laugh loudly or brag like before. Some store owners even mentioned that these men began paying more attention to how they treated employees and strangers, showing unusual politeness and patience. On the surface, it seemed like the institute was having a positive influence, but the secrecy surrounding it made people uncomfortable. The mayor of Raventon requested a formal meeting with Elena, hoping to learn more about her program. Elena agreed but provided only general explanations. She described her school as a modern education platform focused on personal accountability, emotional discipline, and social awareness. She spoke calmly and confidently, using professional language that sounded reasonable yet revealed almost nothing specific. When the mayor asked why only men were allowed to enroll, Elena simply said her research showed that men often lacked safe spaces to confront certain personal challenges. Her answer satisfied some officials, but others felt she was carefully avoiding deeper questions. Behind closed doors, families of enrolled students began sharing concerns. Some wives mentioned their husbands had become more distant emotionally, not in a negative way but in a way that felt guarded. Mothers noticed their sons had started spending long hours writing in notebooks or reading unfamiliar books that carried the institute's emblem. A few parents even said their sons declined social events, claiming they needed to focus on reflection assignments. No one knew what those assignments involved. Marcus decided to visit the public records office to learn more about Elena Ward. Surprisingly, there was very little information available. She had no listed business history, no previous residence in nearby cities, and no public social media presence. The institute itself was registered under a newly formed educational foundation funded by private investors whose names were protected under legal confidentiality. The lack of background information only deepened the mystery surrounding her sudden arrival in Raventon. Late one evening, Marcus received an anonymous message through his newsroom email. The sender refused to share their name but claimed they had once attended one of Elena's trial workshops in another city. The message described intense sessions where participants were asked to confront personal regrets, past mistakes, and hidden fears in ways that felt emotionally overwhelming. The sender didn't accuse Elena of wrongdoing but warned Marcus that her methods were far more personal than professional. Before Marcus could reply, the email account disappeared. Determined to gather more information, Marcus began observing the institute from a nearby cafe that stayed open late. Over several nights, he noticed patterns in the students' behavior. They arrived at exactly the same time, entered in silence, and left in smaller groups rather than all at once. Occasionally, he saw men stepping outside during breaks, standing alone under the streetlights while reading from small notebooks. Their expressions often looked serious, sometimes even emotional, as if they were processing difficult memories. One rainy night, Marcus witnessed something that unsettled him even more. A student rushed out of the building looking shaken, breathing heavily as he leaned against the gate. Elena followed him moments later, speaking to him in a calm voice Marcus couldn't hear through the rain. The man covered his face with his hands, clearly struggling with strong emotions. After several minutes, Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, and the man slowly nodded before returning inside with her. The interaction didn't look threatening, but it suggested the classes were pushing students into deeply personal territory. Around the same time, Marcus began noticing subtle changes across the town. Some of the institute's students started volunteering for community projects without announcing their involvement. Others quietly resolved long-standing personal conflicts, surprising neighbors who had witnessed years of arguments. While many residents appreciated these changes, others felt uneasy about how quickly these transformations were happening. Marcus's curiosity turned into quiet obsession. He spent hours reviewing surveillance angles, town permits, and delivery schedules connected to the institute. One document caught his attention, a shipment log showing large orders of sealed envelopes, journals, and audio recording devices delivered weekly. The items themselves weren't suspicious, but the quantity suggested the students were participating in activities that required extensive personal documentation. One afternoon, Marcus received a phone call from Daniel asking to meet again. When they sat together at a park bench, Daniel looked both calm and exhausted. He spoke about how the institute encouraged students to confront their past decisions and understand how those decisions affected others around them. He said the lessons were difficult but necessary. As Daniel spoke, Marcus noticed a faint tension in his brother's voice, as if he wanted to share more but was holding himself back. Before leaving, Daniel said something that stayed with Marcus long after their meeting ended. He quietly mentioned that the final phase of the program was approaching, describing it as the most important and challenging part of the training. When Marcus asked what the final phase involved, Daniel paused for several seconds, staring at the ground. He finally said that every student had to complete a personal task assigned directly by Elena, a task designed to test whether they had truly changed. Marcus asked what kind of task could prove something like that, but Daniel only shook his head and stood up, ending the conversation earlier than usual. As Daniel walked away, Marcus noticed him slipping a folded paper deeper into his jacket pocket, as if protecting it from being seen. That night, Marcus returned to the cafe across from the institute, watching as students gathered once again under the dim streetlights. He couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen inside those walls. As the last student entered the building, Marcus saw Elena step outside briefly, scanning the empty street with a calm but watchful expression. For a moment, her eyes seemed to pause near the cafe window, and Marcus instinctively leaned back into the shadows. Just before Elena re-entered the building, a black delivery car pulled up quietly beside the gate. The driver stepped out and handed her a locked metal case. She signed a document, accepted the case without hesitation, and carried it inside herself instead of letting staff handle it. The heavy doors closed behind her once again, leaving Marcus staring at the now silent building, wondering what could possibly be inside that case and why it seemed important enough for Elena to personally receive it. Marcus followed Daniel from a distance that night, careful not to be seen. The streets of Raventon were unusually quiet, and the soft glow of streetlights stretched Daniel's shadow across the pavement as he walked. Marcus noticed that his brother wasn't heading home. Instead, Daniel moved toward the older part of town where several abandoned storefronts and empty parking lots stood untouched for years. Marcus stayed behind parked cars and dark corners, his mind racing with questions about the envelope Daniel was still holding tightly inside his jacket. Daniel finally stopped near an old community center that had been closed after storm damage years earlier. The building sat in silence, its windows covered with wooden boards and its front steps cracked with weeds pushing through the concrete. Daniel stood there for several moments, staring at the building like he was gathering courage. Marcus watched as Daniel slowly pulled the envelope out and opened it under the dim streetlight. Even from a distance, Marcus could see his brother reading the contents carefully, his face tightening with emotion as his eyes moved across the page. After reading, Daniel folded the paper again and placed it back into the envelope. He looked toward the abandoned building, then checked his watch as if he had been given a specific time to be there. Marcus felt his chest tighten. The entire situation felt carefully planned, like Daniel wasn't acting on his own decision but following instructions he believed he had to complete. Marcus wanted to step forward and confront him, but something held him back. He needed to understand the bigger picture before interfering. While Marcus stayed hidden, a black car slowly pulled into the empty parking lot. The same type of vehicle Marcus had seen delivering the locked metal case to the institute. The headlights turned off before the engine stopped, leaving the car sitting in darkness. The driver stepped out, but Marcus couldn't clearly see his face. The man walked toward Daniel and handed him a small box, speaking in a low voice that didn't carry across the empty lot. Daniel nodded slowly, accepting the box with both hands, his posture stiff and uncertain. The driver returned to the car and left without another word, disappearing into the quiet streets. Daniel remained standing alone, holding both the envelope and the box, breathing slowly as if trying to steady himself. Marcus noticed his brother close his eyes briefly before turning toward the abandoned building and walking up the broken steps. He stopped at the door, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small key Marcus had never seen before. The door opened with a heavy creak, and Daniel stepped inside, closing it behind him. Marcus waited several seconds before moving closer, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. He reached the building and pressed his ear gently against the door, trying to listen. At first he heard nothing but silence. Then faint sounds began to reach him, footsteps moving across the empty floor, followed by the sound of something being placed carefully on a surface. Marcus tried the door, but it was locked again from the inside. He stepped back, scanning the building's boarded windows, searching for any small gap that might give him a glimpse inside. Meanwhile, back at the institute, the late-night sessions appeared more intense than ever. Several students had begun receiving their sealed envelopes over the past few days. The tension among them was noticeable even from the outside. Some men left the building looking deeply thoughtful, while others looked shaken but determined. The institute's staff had increased security, limiting visitors and closely monitoring the entrances. Elena continued moving through the halls with her usual calm presence, yet those who saw her closely noticed a sharper focus in her eyes, as if she was carefully observing every student's reaction to their final assignments. In the town itself, rumors reached their peak. Families quietly compared notes, noticing how several enrolled men had started disappearing for short periods at unusual hours, always returning without explanation. Some residents worried that the training program was pushing students into emotionally overwhelming challenges. Others believed the institute was forcing men to face responsibilities they had avoided for years. The divide in public opinion grew stronger, creating tension throughout Raventon. Back at the abandoned community center, Marcus finally found a narrow crack between two wooden boards covering a side window. He carefully positioned himself to look inside. The interior was dimly lit by a single portable lamp placed in the center of the dusty floor. Daniel stood beside a table, opening the small box he had received. Marcus strained his eyes, trying to see what was inside. He could only make out several sealed folders, each labeled with Daniel's name. Daniel opened one folder and began reading, his hands slightly shaking. As he read, Marcus noticed his brother's expression shift from confusion to deep emotional weight. Daniel leaned forward, placing both hands on the table as if the information inside the folder felt heavier than he expected. He slowly sat down in a broken chair, staring at the documents for a long time without moving. Suddenly, Marcus heard another sound behind Daniel. From the dark hallway of the abandoned building, footsteps echoed softly across the floor. Daniel immediately stood up, turning toward the sound, his face filled with tension and anticipation. The shadows shifted as someone stepped closer into the weak light. Marcus pressed closer to the window crack, his breath slowing as he tried to focus. The figure moving toward Daniel walked with a steady, confident pace. As the person entered the circle of light, Marcus felt his stomach drop. The figure wasn't a stranger, and it wasn't someone Daniel expected to face alone. Inside the building, Daniel took a slow step backward, gripping the edge of the table while staring at the approaching figure. His voice, barely audible, carried a mix of shock and disbelief as he whispered something Marcus couldn't hear through the glass. The lamp flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the walls as the figure stopped only a few feet away from him, holding something in their hand that Daniel clearly recognized. Outside, Marcus froze, realizing that whatever was happening inside that building was connected to everything Elena had been preparing her students for, and he had the growing fear that his brother was standing at the center of a moment that could change his life forever. Marcus pressed his eye closer to the narrow crack, barely daring to blink. Inside the abandoned community center, the weak lamp light revealed the figure standing in front of Daniel. As the person stepped fully into view, Marcus felt a jolt of disbelief run through him. It was their father, Leonard. The same father who had left their family nearly 15 years ago without explanation, cutting off all contact and leaving behind a silence that had shaped both Marcus and Daniel in different ways. Daniel's shoulders stiffened as he stared at the man he hadn't spoken to since he was a teenager. Leonard looked older, his hair thinner and his posture slightly bent, but there was no doubt it was him. He held a thin folder in his hand, similar to the ones inside Daniel's box. The room filled with a quiet tension that felt heavier than any argument. Daniel's voice trembled as he spoke, though Marcus couldn't hear the exact words. Leonard responded slowly, his expression serious, almost regretful. Marcus's mind raced. The Institute's final assignments suddenly felt far more personal than he had imagined. This wasn't just about reflection or emotional exercises. Elena had somehow tracked down people connected to her students' pasts and brought them into these carefully arranged confrontations. The realization made Marcus's stomach twist. It explained the sealed documents, the confidential deliveries, and the strange disappearances of students at night. The training wasn't staying inside classrooms, it was pulling real people back into unfinished chapters of the students' lives. Inside the building, Daniel opened one of the folders from his box and handed it to Leonard. Leonard glanced down at the pages, his hands tightening around the papers. His lips moved as he spoke, his tone appearing defensive at first, then slowly shifting into something heavier. Daniel listened, standing perfectly still, as if every word carried years of unanswered questions. Marcus noticed Daniel occasionally glance toward the envelope still lying on the table, as though it contained instructions guiding how this meeting was supposed to unfold. Suddenly, another movement caught Marcus's attention. From the far side of the building, two more figures stepped into the shadows near the hallway entrance. They remained partially hidden, but Marcus recognized one of them almost immediately. It was Elena. She wasn't interfering, simply observing from a distance with the same calm, watchful expression she carried during her classes. Beside her stood a man Marcus didn't recognize, holding a tablet and occasionally writing notes. The presence of observers made the moment inside the room feel carefully controlled, like Daniel's emotional confrontation was part of a larger, structured process. Marcus felt anger rise in his chest. Watching his brother face their father after years of pain while being silently monitored felt invasive, almost manipulative. He struggled to decide whether Elena was helping her students confront their past or pushing them into situations they weren't fully prepared for. The deeper Marcus thought about it, the more complicated it seemed. Daniel wasn't being forced to stay. He hadn't tried to leave. In fact, Daniel appeared determined to complete whatever task he had been assigned. As the conversation inside grew more intense, Daniel's posture shifted. He stepped closer to Leonard, his expression filled with emotions Marcus couldn't fully read. Hurt, frustration, and something that looked like quiet strength. Leonard lowered his gaze, gripping the folder as if it contained memories he had tried to forget. For several long seconds, neither of them moved, the silence stretching between them like a fragile thread. Then, something unexpected happened. Leonard reached into his jacket and pulled out another envelope, nearly identical to the one Daniel had received. He placed it slowly on the table between them. Daniel stared at it, confusion spreading across his face. Marcus leaned closer to the crack, trying to see if there was any marking on it, but the angle made it impossible. Leonard spoke again, his voice appearing heavier, almost apologetic. Daniel's eyes widened slightly as he listened. Whatever Leonard was revealing seemed to shift the entire purpose of the meeting. Daniel picked up the second envelope with hesitant hands, turning it over as if unsure whether he should open it. Marcus noticed Elena take a small step forward from the shadows, her attention locked completely on Daniel, waiting for his next decision. Outside, a cold wind moved through the broken parking lot, rustling loose papers and debris across the ground. Marcus felt a growing fear that this confrontation wasn't only about Daniel finding closure with their father. It felt like a doorway into something larger, something Elena had been carefully building through every stage of her mysterious training program. Inside, Daniel slowly broke the seal on the second envelope. As he unfolded the paper inside, his entire expression changed. His shoulders dropped slightly, and his breathing became uneven. He read the page once, then again as if trying to process what it meant. Leonard stepped back, giving him space, while Elena remained still in the shadows, watching closely. Marcus pressed his hand against the wall beside the window, his pulse racing as he tried to understand what new truth could possibly shake his brother this deeply. Daniel lowered the paper slowly, his eyes moving toward his father with a mixture of shock and realization, as though the assignment he had been given wasn't just about confronting the past, but about uncovering something neither of them had ever spoken about before. Daniel's hands trembled as he held the paper, his eyes moving across the words like they carried the weight of years he had never understood. The silence inside the abandoned community center felt suffocating. Leonard stood a few steps away, his face pale, his eyes filled with regret that seemed too heavy to hide anymore. Marcus strained to read Daniel's reaction through the narrow opening, his own chest tightening as he watched his brother struggle to breathe steadily. Daniel finally spoke, his voice unsteady but firm. He asked Leonard if what was written in the letter was true. Leonard hesitated for only a moment before nodding slowly. The truth revealed in that envelope was something Daniel had never imagined. Leonard explained that he hadn't simply abandoned the family years ago. He had left after being involved in a serious financial mistake that nearly destroyed several families in Raventon, including their own. He had believed that staying would only bring more damage and public disgrace to them. Instead of facing the consequences openly, he chose to disappear, convincing himself that distance would protect his sons from the fallout of his actions. Daniel listened in silence, gripping the edge of the table as Leonard admitted how his decision had created years of confusion, anger, and emotional distance for both Daniel and Marcus. Leonard explained that Elena's institute had contacted him months earlier, presenting him with the opportunity to finally face his past and speak the truth directly to his son. At first, Leonard refused. But after receiving detailed records of how his disappearance had affected his family, he realized he had been running from responsibility rather than protecting anyone. Daniel's breathing grew heavier as emotions he had buried for years surfaced all at once. He spoke about growing up feeling abandoned, constantly wondering what he or Marcus had done wrong. His voice cracked as he admitted how that pain had shaped his choices, relationships, and confidence throughout his life. The room filled with raw honesty, neither man interrupting the other as they spoke truths they had both avoided for more than a decade. From the shadows, Elena watched quietly, her expression focused but calm. The man beside her continued taking notes, observing every detail of the confrontation. Marcus felt his anger begin to shift into confusion as he watched the scene unfold. What felt manipulative before now looked like something carefully designed to force long-avoided conversations that neither Daniel nor Leonard would have faced on their own. Daniel eventually lowered the letter, staring at Leonard with tears he didn't try to hide. He asked the one question that had lived in his mind for years: why Leonard never tried to contact them even after leaving. Leonard's voice broke as he admitted that guilt had made him believe he no longer deserved to be part of their lives. He said he thought silence was easier than facing their disappointment. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air felt heavy with memories, regrets, and emotions that had finally been brought into the open. Then, slowly, Daniel stepped forward. Marcus held his breath, unsure of what his brother would do next. Daniel reached out, not in anger but with a hesitant, uncertain gesture. Leonard froze, staring at Daniel's outstretched hand as if he couldn't believe it was real. After several seconds, Leonard accepted it, his grip shaking with emotion. The tension that had built for years finally broke, replaced by a fragile sense of closure neither of them fully understood yet. Marcus felt his own eyes sting as he watched the two men stand there, confronting a past that had silently shaped their entire family. For the first time, Marcus realized the Institute's training wasn't about controlling men or changing them through pressure. It was about forcing them to face unfinished chapters in their lives and giving them a chance to rewrite them honestly. Just as the emotional moment settled, Elena stepped forward from the shadows, her presence calm but commanding. She approached Daniel and Leonard, thanking them for completing what she called the final accountability stage. Daniel looked exhausted but relieved, while Leonard nodded quietly, still processing everything that had just happened. Marcus leaned closer to the window, expecting the moment to end there. But Elena turned toward Leonard and handed him another document. She explained that every student who completed the final stage was required to understand not only their personal past but also how their actions affected the larger community. Leonard opened the document slowly, reading it with growing surprise. Inside were legal records showing that the financial damage Leonard had once caused had quietly been repaired over the years through anonymous donations and settlements arranged by Elena's foundation. Leonard looked up at her, stunned, asking why she would do something like that for him or any of the students. Elena's calm expression softened slightly as she explained that the Institute didn't just teach responsibility, it invested in giving people a real chance to fix what they had broken. She said that every student's training included repairing harm in ways that created lasting change, even if the community never knew who was behind it. Marcus felt a strange sense of admiration mixed with disbelief. The institute that had seemed secretive and unsettling was actually operating on a level far deeper than anyone in Raventon had imagined. As Daniel and Leonard stood together, processing everything they had learned, Marcus finally stepped away from the window, feeling like he had witnessed something deeply personal and life-changing. He began walking back toward the street, his mind racing with the story he could tell and the truth he had uncovered. But just as he reached the parking lot, the abandoned building's side door opened quietly behind him. Marcus turned, surprised to see Elena standing there alone. She looked at him calmly as if she had known he was watching the entire time. She thanked him for caring enough about his brother to stay close, then handed him a sealed envelope with his name written clearly across the front. Marcus stared at it, confused, his heart starting to pound again. Elena simply said that every story has more than one chapter and that some lessons are meant for observers just as much as participants. Without explaining further, she turned and walked back into the building, leaving Marcus standing under the dim street light, holding an envelope that felt far heavier than paper should ever feel. Marcus stood under the dim street light for several minutes, staring at the envelope with his name written across it. The night air felt colder than before, and the silence around the abandoned community center made the moment feel heavier. He turned the envelope over in his hands, noticing the same emblem from Elena's institute stamped neatly across the seal. His first instinct was to open it immediately, but something about everything he had just witnessed made him pause. He slipped it carefully into his jacket and walked home, his thoughts moving faster than his steps. By the time Marcus reached his apartment, the first light of morning was beginning to rise over Raventon. He sat at his kitchen table, placing the envelope in front of him like it was waiting for permission to change something in his life. After a long breath, he broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The words were simple, written in calm, direct language. The letter explained that Elena's institute didn't only focus on enrolled students. It also recognized people who carried emotional responsibilities they had never faced. It described how Marcus had spent years protecting others by staying strong, observant, and silent about his own feelings regarding his father's disappearance. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he continued reading. The letter didn't assign him a task like Daniel's or the other students. Instead, it offered him an invitation to attend a private session at the institute if he chose to confront his own unresolved questions. It made it clear that participation was voluntary, and that some people never needed to enter the classroom to begin their own process of reflection and accountability. Later that day, Marcus visited Daniel at their mother's house. Daniel looked emotionally drained but lighter, like a weight he had carried for years had finally shifted. Their mother sat quietly nearby, listening as Daniel carefully explained what had happened the night before. He spoke honestly, sharing how the institute's training had forced him to understand not just his father's mistakes, but also how holding on to anger had shaped his own decisions. Their mother listened with tears in her eyes, but there was relief in her expression as well, the kind that comes when long-hidden truths finally come into the open. Marcus eventually showed Daniel the envelope he had received. Daniel wasn't surprised. He explained that Elena believed healing didn't follow one path. Some people needed direct confrontation, while others needed time to choose their own way forward. Daniel admitted he wasn't sure yet what his relationship with their father would look like in the future, but he no longer felt controlled by unanswered questions. Over the next few weeks, Raventon slowly returned to its usual quiet rhythm, but the subtle changes were noticeable. Several men who had completed Elena's adult training program began quietly improving community projects, mentoring younger residents and repairing personal relationships that had been damaged for years. The institute remained private about its methods, but its influence could be felt through the town's growing sense of understanding and accountability. Marcus never immediately accepted the institute's invitation, but he kept the letter safely in his desk drawer. He continued writing his investigative story, not as an exposé, but as a reflection on personal growth, emotional responsibility, and the courage it takes to face past decisions. He realized the real mystery wasn't what Elena taught inside her adult learning school, but why so many people avoided learning those lessons on their own. One evening, as Marcus walked past the institute's iron gate, he noticed new students quietly entering for their first session. He paused for a moment, watching them step inside, each carrying their own untold stories. He touched the envelope still resting in his jacket pocket, feeling the quiet reminder that some doors don't open until a person is ready to walk through them.